Are you considering setting up your own metals futures firm again, given the boom that must happen the longer we try and stick to these net zero goals? You know, the amount of copper that has to get mined, the amount of cobalt, the amount of nickel is just, well, it's not possible.
No, it's not possible. As I mentioned a few moments ago, the implications of the prices are enormous. Am I going back into the commodities business? A bit long in the tooth for that now, I think, although it's not really open outcry anymore, so maybe I could go. Yeah, no, I mean, that's the other point, really, isn't it? That the inflationary potential of all of this is absolutely enormous. And here we are now, you know, with what in this country in particular, the Bank of England more than happy that implications of this for commodity prices would be absolutely, huge, enormous. You will start. It was interesting. I saw even last week a couple of newspaper leaders saying, is it time we rethought net zero? I can feel it. I know it. The one thing in life I've been good at is being way ahead of the pack and seeing where the trend's going. And believe you me, there is going to be a massive change.
Yeah, it's that gap between what politicians are saying, what people actually want, that you seem to be very good at identifying and pointing out and then closing eventually when it came to Brexit. And that's the second reason I'm interviewing you, the first being the London Metals exchange experience. But on the first one, how far along that political path can they get before something snaps politically? And Brexit was sort of delayed and put off and obfuscated for quite a long time until what happened, and you managed to sort of wake them up. What's the same sequence of events for net zero? How bad do things have to get?
Oh, look, you're asking me to sort of look ahead into the crystal ball and predict what will happen. As ever, it's events, isn't it? It's unforeseen events that trigger a change of national debate. Whether that is a catastrophic blackout, the lights go out for 2 or 3 days. Not impossible. I mean, literally, I'm not scaremongering here. That is not impossible. So whether it's a blackout or something like that, I don't know what it will be. But something will happen. There will be an event. Meanwhile, you will find people beginning to make the connection. If you ask people, do you want to live on a clean planet? 80% say, yeah, absolutely. Of course I do. And then if you ask people, do you want to pay for it? So you see, these are the realities of all of this. And I think you're going to find a lot more public figures, a lot more scientists standing up and giving a counter argument, which is, the attempt to pigeonhole anyone that questions this as being, against the environment and wanting all our grandkids to die, in some sort of blazing inferno. I think these arguments are beginning to wear a bit thin. So it's events. Something will happen that will really, really, shift the argument hugely. But meanwhile, there is a growing debate. We're seeing it increasingly in our press. I'm seeing it as I go around the country, and it's happening. Probably Europe's even further down the road than we are, actually.
Yeah, I've noticed actually in the Australian media, for some reason, they're a few months behind on the skepticism. And it might be because of the energy crisis in Europe and the inflationary situation. But people in Australia still seem very positive in the newspapers about net zero. The reality hasn't quite struck yet in the same way, although it is emerging as well.
As I say, it does depend, Nick, to how you ask the question. It's so easy through polling and working with friendly newspapers to get across the perception that you want. But when you actually drill down into the data, it can look a little bit different.
And then experience is a whole nother level, right? Because you might have answered in your poll that you're willing to spend X amount of money on your electricity bill in order to go green. But when the bill actually hits, it's a different question. I remember a lecturer at university of mine, she tried to sign up to the renewable power company. And she was a lecturer in energy investing. And she was very pro-green, but she was a good character. And she requested this higher bill in order to pay for renewables. And the person on the line said, "Really? Nobody's ever said yes before." This would have been about more than 10 years ago.
I mean, the same thing applies to income tax. Any of you can pay more income tax. All you have to do is to ring the exchequer and you can pay more income tax. How many people do that every year? Don't know, but I bet I can count them on the fingers of one hand.
Let's, I think it'd be less than that. Let's dig into the investment implications a bit more. You identified natural gas, it seems to me, in the short to medium term, and nuclear longer term.
Yes.
Commodities, where do they fit into that?
Well, I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult, given the inflationary style cycle that we're in, not to be bullish at commodities. Even if in the end we don't go all electric, it's difficult not to think that I'm going to go back to the first sentence or two that we use today, which is about 5 billion of the world's population are relatively poor compared to us. And they want fridges, they want freezers, they want motor cars, they want to go on holidays. That's what they aspire to. And you can't do any of those things without copper. It's interesting, isn't it? You know, here we are in 2023. You would have thought by now that a reliable substitute for copper as a conductor would have been found. And you know what? Despite the billions that have been spent in research, nothing has. So, medium to long term, you've got to be bullish on copper, unless you think the whole world is headed for catastrophic economic collapse. And who knows? Maybe the West will have a serious setback at some point. But even if the West has a serious setback, it doesn't stop that desire of people in India and China and Indonesia to want to have better lives. So I'm still very much bullish on metals, medium to long term, definitely.
What about oil, Nigel?
Oil is, I think actually oil right at the moment, I think probably looks quite cheap, to be honest with you. We will go on using oil for many, many years to come. So no, I'm bullish of energy. I'm bullish of metals. I think these things will be a lot higher in the next few years. The world, the aspirations of the world, and also the realities that we're going to need this stuff for a very, very long. It's kind of almost as if investors are saying at the moment, well, let's not have oil stocks because we're not going to be using oil in 5 years. Well, I'll tell you what, you're in for quite a shock because it's going to be used for decades to come. So that long term, I'm still very bullish commodities.
What do you make of the government's efforts so far, especially in the US and also in Europe, to invest in new mines and new production of the minerals and resources that are needed?
I mean, Starmer's going to set up the Great British Energy Company. I mean, can you imagine it? Can you imagine it? A Labour cabinet investing our money in various projects. I mean, what chance has that got of working in any way at all? Governments don't get these things right. Free market capital gets these things right because it has the fear factor if things go wrong. As soon as you take out the fear factor from economics, you get laziness, incompetence, and corruption too. And I learned these lessons back in the 1970s, and you know what? They haven't changed. Isn't it funny? I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, we were talking about modern monetary theory. Do you remember all that rubbish? Modern money grows on trees, we can borrow it. You don't hear that being talked about anymore. No, this is headed up by Biden's gang. This whole concept is absolute madness.
I think the key point here really is, especially for people of the persuasion that you and I, is that net zero is an unprecedented intervention in the economy. And history says that those tend to not go very well, regardless of what the motivation is. It brings back memories of the Cultural Revolution and what was the sparrow one in China where they tried to kill all the sparrows, and yet all of these interventions. And I wonder whether humanity just seems to need to go from one sort of crisis justifying intervention by government to the next, whether it's the population bomb or global cooling or acid rain or whatever it is. We just seem to focus on one after the other and go through these rolling cycles.
I mean, that's the great thing through history, isn't it? History teaches us that we never learn anything. And we keep on making the same mistakes over and over again, and that is what we're doing now. But interestingly, on net zero, of course, remember, this isn't just economic. This is actually social. We will have to go along with this agenda, radically change our lifestyles and things that we believe. I mean, isn't it interesting? Right at the minute, in Kent and Sussex, there are severe water shortages. Villages without water for a whole week. And we're told it's okay. The villagers of East Sussex and Kent have got a blitz spirit. Well, let's see how long that lasts. Things that we've taken for granted as being part of our lives in the modern world start to disappear with net zero agendas, start to disappear with a rapidly increasing population in the southeast of England, which is the direct link in this case. And if you start effectively saying to people, look, you can't go on holiday to Spain. You can't drive your car in Birmingham on Tuesdays. You start to say this to people, and that's where we're going. June the 13th, 2023, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, put out a warning. Air quality is poor. Please do not drive your car at all unless it's necessary. Do not leave the engine idling. Don't burn any wood. I mean, if I said to you 5 years ago they were going to lock us down for month after month because there was a flu virus going around, you'd have laughed at me. Climate lockdowns, these are the things that they're going to do that will lead to the pushback.
And yet you've made me hopeful that there's sort of a political movement or the opportunity for one to try and reverse this and avoid this, and this might just go down as another bizarre episode in the history books.
I think it will, Nick. As I say, I repeat the point. They will go on down this direction for some years to come, but as they do so, awareness against the stupidity of what they're doing is going to increase, and at some point, it'll flip.